Welcome again. We're really so happy that so many of you can be here from so many different parts of the Advocates' work. We're really looking forward to telling you a little bit more today about our international advocacy and providing the opportunity for you to hear from some of our partners. Our goal today is to raise about $15,000, but also just to really give a chance to meet some of our inspiring partners and learn a little bit about the work that we do together to protect human rights. I want to give a special welcome and thank you to all of our host committee members, our partners, our volunteers, and our staff who are here with us today. So if you're associated with us in any of those ways, please just give a wave or do a wave reaction. So at the Advocates for Human Rights, we use international advocacy to further our organizational mission to implement international human rights standards and promote civil society and reinforce the rule of law. We use our special consultative status at the United Nations to amplify the voices of our clients and our partners and to bring the authority of the United Nations to bear on governments to hold them accountable. We've seen the impact that this international advocacy can have. And I'll just give you a couple of examples and then you'll hear in more detail from some of our partners. But for example, Croatia had decriminalized domestic violence and defunded their shelter programs, but advocacy with our partners at the United Nations resulted in reversals in both law and policy within a matter of weeks. Both Morocco and Tunisia abolished laws that allowed a rapist who married his minor victim to avoid prosecution after international advocacy with our partners from North Africa. Successful advocacy at the UN Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in 2019 led the Colombian government to begin drafting amendments to laws that address domestic violence and also opened the door to further opportunities for advocacy with public officials in Colombia. Human rights violations are experienced on a very local level. We're talking about people. We work with our human rights defender partners to document human rights issues of concern on the local level in their countries and to bring international pressure for change. And that's true even here in our home community of Minnesota and in the United States. Issues like systemic racism and police accountability are international human rights issues. So we'd like to now share with you a few stories about how we work to shine a global spotlight on human rights problems in order to hold governments accountable and create lasting change. So first, I'd like to start with talking about LGBTI rights. The Advocates for Human Rights works to uphold the human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and other people who experience violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity and expression. International support and attention can be critically important. In March, our partners from Kenya were able to brief the UN Human Rights Committee about the rights of LGBTI persons in Kenya. And of course, during the pandemic, everything has moved to remote. And so they were able to do that remotely without having to go to Geneva. We've also been collaborating with the Moscow Community Center for LGBTQ+ initiatives on a number of projects, but also on reporting to the United Nations about problems in Russia. And these partners are here today. Our partners from Kenya and Russia are with us, and we'd like to invite you to meet them in the breakout room later in the program to learn from them about their work and what you can do to make a difference. But now I'd like to invite one of our partners from Cameroon, and I'd like you to meet Joachim, who works with Alternatives Cameroon. The Advocates has partnered with Alternatives Cameroon since 2013, when we were able to visit them at their offices in Douala, Cameroon, and we're so impressed with the work that they're doing, both to provide health services and to protect the rights of LGBTI persons in Cameroon. So Joachim, welcome. Do you want to unmute yourself? I see you waving. There you go.
Yes, welcome. Thank you. Thank you
Hello.
for inviting me. Yes.
We're so happy to have you here visiting us from Cameroon.
Yes, thank you.
Now, you were able to join us in Geneva a couple of years ago before Cameroon's Universal Periodic Review at the UN Human Rights Council. What was that experience like for you to do international advocacy at the United Nations?
This was a very huge experience. It was the first time that we were really introduced to that UN mechanism. So we were able to reach out with representatives from many countries, hold meeting with them, and suggest them to send some recommendation to Cameroon State. And more importantly, we were able to reach the representative from Cameroon, which is easier to do that in Geneva than it is in Cameroon. And after that, we were able to keep in touch with our Ministry of Justice. And lately, we had a meeting with that ministry, and we came into an agreement with the Ministry of Justice that they have taken position to oppose violence against LGBTI in Cameroon. That is a first step and a good basis on which we can work together with our government, which was not at all possible before. So that is these lobbying technique and advocacy techniques have been made possible through the support of the advocates, and we are very grateful for that.
That's amazing. So the government, the Justice Department was able to agree to work with you for the first time after that.
Yes, yes. And they have taken a clear position to oppose or to work with us in preventing or reducing violence targeting LGBTI people. So it's the first time that we might have a common basis from which to work with our government. There is still many things to do, but having such agreement, even in just a meeting with them, it's a good the start for possible work with the government. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to share about how the collaboration with the advocates has impacted your work on LGBTI rights in Cameroon?
Okay, through the work with the advocates, we have been used to the UN mechanism on how to.
It looks like, unfortunately,
yes, how to understand the mechanism, how to write the report, and how to get in touch with the UN, the treaty, the committees, the treaty organs, and this is a relatively easy tools to use that we are not aware before. So we are now we have benefited from that technical support from the advocates, and we are now more used to that mechanism, and we know we can use it. We know how to work with UN organs and how to work with UN mechanism, and this is a great support that the advocates gave to us. After the work with the advocates, we have been able to get in touch with the government and try to work with them through writing or helping them write another report to the Committee for the Rights of Women. women's equality. So this is something you have gained from the advocates.
Fantastic. Yes, and the Advocates we produce probably more than 50, kind of average more than 50 written submissions to UN and regional human rights bodies with partners like Alternatives Cameroon every year. And we're able to do that in part because of our pro bono volunteers, and a number of them are here with us today. So, so fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
And you are very thankful for these volunteers. Thank you.
Yeah, we couldn't do this work without them. So thank you, Joachim. And as I said, our partners from Alternatives Cameroon, as well as partners from Kenya and the Moscow Community Center, will be in one of the break rooms afterwards. So we encourage you to come and meet them and hear more stories. But now I'd like to turn it over to Senior Staff Attorney Amy Burquist, who will talk about some of our work related to the death penalty.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Burquist, and I'm, in addition to working at the Advocates, I'm also a vice president of the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty. And when people ask me what I do, I explain my job is really to be like a microphone to amplify the voices of our partners so the UN can use its authority to press their governments for change. And many of those partners we work with are members of the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty. The coalition is this global network of more than 160 organizations fighting to abolish the death penalty around the world. And the Advocates plays a special role in the coalition. We're on the steering committee, and we help a lot of the under-resourced members of the coalition engage in advocacy at the UN to try to leverage that pressure and authority of the international community to encourage their governments to move toward abolition. And here today, among others, we have the executive director of the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty coming to us from Paris, Aurélie Brasser. And she has, you heard a little bit already about the training that we do on doing advocacy at the United Nations in Geneva, and Aurélie has participated in that as well. I thought it would be helpful if Aurélie had a few words to say about what that was like from her perspective, learning about how to work with the UN. Aurélie, can you unmute yourself and share a little bit?
Hi, Amy. Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me the floor. I have to say, before working so closely with the Advocates for Human Rights, I had been to the UN for a couple of times. But attending the training session with the Advocates has given me a lot of insights, and it has really empowered me in going to meet with UN member states. It's so fascinating to see that you can actually just walk in the room at the Human Rights Council and just knock on someone's shoulder and say, hey, I would like to talk to you about the death penalty in, say, Iran, for example. And that person is actually going to look at you and say, okay, can we talk in 30 minutes? I will be at the Serpentine Bar, and we can discuss this issue in more details. And then, you know, I would have never thought before that I could just simply walk in the room and ask to give some feedback, some information about the death penalty. And Geneva is the perfect place to do that. And that training with the Advocates for Human Rights, and there was a lot of people. I mean, and there was also many lawyers, I think pro bono lawyers who are drafting the reports, right, Amy? And also other civil society organizations who have been contributing to the reports, and being together in Geneva at the same time, sharing also in the evenings, you know, what we've done during the day, what we've learned, and how that, you know, helps in the future and how we can improve. Also helping organize side events, reading written oral declarations during the council. It really gives you a good sense of what you can do, how much you can do actually when you're organized, when you know what you want to get out of the meetings, and when you have clear, concrete recommendations based on a written report that you have previously submitted. It really makes a difference. And now when I go back to Geneva, I always feel like I have the Advocates for Human Rights behind me. And I always think of that training session where it was really an eye-opener. I was like, wow, I can really do that.
Thanks so
thank
much,
you.
Oli. That's wonderful. So we think about us building the capacity of members of the coalition, but it's also the coalition itself, where we work together, and together we're stronger and more effective. I also wanted to mention, we heard the word pivot a lot in the past year, and so we haven't been able to go to Geneva to do the training sessions. So instead, we've done virtual side events and virtual debriefings of the UN sessions, and we worked in November with a colleague named Alexius Kamangila from Malawi, and he was part of our virtual side event in October, leading up to the review of Malawi, and then we participated in a debriefing. And you may have heard that earlier this month, Malawi abolished the death penalty. And so I heard back from Alexius yesterday and asked him, what he thought about this news. He said, "I cannot believe it was just last year in November when we were bemoaning Malawi's responses to the recommendations by 17 states on abolition. This is work we had done together. I was thrilled, and really it was a miracle, but that which has been worked on for a long time, and it has been teamwork and hard work, but most importantly, dreams come true." And that was really just inspiring to hear from him. And it's really fun to be able to celebrate those victories with the coalition, but unless a country abolishes the death penalty like Malawi did, it's often hard to know whether we're making a difference. But I can give you another example of how this happened in the virtual space. The United States was coming up for review, and so what we did is we lobbied electronically, but we also set up one-on-one meetings. And one of those meetings, Lisa Borden, my colleague, set up was with Belgium. And in these meetings, we try to encourage governments to make recommendations, not just to abolish the death penalty. That's great. We want them to make those recommendations, but also make what we call incremental recommendations, things that we think might have a greater chance of being accepted by the government being reviewed and would actually help move things forward. And last year, when Lisa had this meeting with Belgium, one of the things that was really front of mind, in part because of Lisa's experience in representing people who had been sentenced to death, and in part because it was the theme for World Day Against the Death Penalty, was access to counsel. And so that was something they really hammered away with the representative from Belgium. And lo and behold, when the review of the United States came, and this was just a week after the elections, Belgium recommended that the United States improve access to legal assistance for individuals who may face a death sentence. And that was actually the only recommendation the United States accepted. And what that means is now we have the door open to work with the Biden administration for the next several years to make sure that they keep their promise, that we do improve legal representation for people who are at risk of being sentenced to death. So it's really meaningful to see that that happened, and to see that Lisa's advocacy in particular really, really had an effect. Today, we're here not only with Aurélie, but also Kevin Miguel Rivera Medina, who's the president of the World Coalition, and Leila Ramdeen, who's the head of Greater Caribbean for Life in Trinidad. She's based in Trinidad and Tobago, leading member of the World Coalition. So join us in the death penalty breakout room to learn more about this work. And now I will hand the floor off to Lisa and Elizabeth to talk about diaspora engagement.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Lacey. I'm the Program Associate for International Justice at the Advocates for Human Rights, and I'm just so excited to see you all here. I'm going to talk a little bit about diaspora engagement. The Advocates trains and provides technical assistance to diaspora community groups and activists, including our asylum clients who want to use human rights monitoring, documentation, and advocacy to change policy and improve human rights conditions in their countries of origin. And diaspora communities are a really critical link in creating change in social institutions and structures to hold governments accountable and to promote the full realization of human rights, both from within the country as well as from without. The Advocates' engagement with diaspora human rights activists is unique among human rights organizations. In the breakout room on diaspora engagement, we will be joined by diaspora human rights activists from Togo and Turkey, so please join us to meet them and learn more. Within the past couple of years, we've made a concerted effort to increase and systematize collaboration with current and former clients on UN advocacy. And we're going to share a little clip with you that kind of illustrates this engagement that we did this past year. So I'll ask my colleague Carter to share his screen. Jeff is a client of ours who worked with us on a debrief following the Universal Periodic Review of Rwanda.
It's very difficult to structure because even they just try to create your opinions before you say, even you say them, and even before your opinions are known, they just try to, like, just to kill, like nothing has to be had against the government, even inside the country. Even you don't even have to, it's even very hard to talk to your friend when you don't trust him, because there is this kind of structure of government censorship. Like, you don't even trust your brother when it comes to government different, like if it comes to having an opinion different to the government direction, you are not even going to trust your brother, you are not even going to trust anybody. So I don't know how they built that kind of structure, but they did it. And 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 if they say anything about opinion of expression and assembly, you know, it's just totally not true.
Jeff, you mentioned.
Thank you, Carter. So that was an example of a client talking about his expertise, having been on the ground in that country. And I'll just, to illustrate kind of the impact of that, I'll share a quote with you from him after we talked about the experience. And he said, "For me, I would say it was just wonderful to me. I'm so proud for participating. It just made me feel better. And that was very empowering to me. It just uplifted me." So there you can see kind of the impact of that work for our client. And now I'm going to pass it off to Lisa and Kerry to talk about human rights in the United States.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So there's been a lot of activity involving the U.S. at the United Nations over the past year as the U.S. underwent its Universal Periodic Review at the Human Rights Council, and the U.S. rejoined the council, which, you know, we had left under the Trump administration, and after the Biden administration took office, we rejoined the council. So there's been an awful lot of activity involving the U.S. It was also an unusual year for international human rights advocacy, as pretty much everything else, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the pandemic changed where we work, as we can't go to Geneva, as you've heard, and we're here working in our office or remotely from other places. But it hasn't changed how we work or the need for the work in building the capacity of our partner organizations. You've heard a little bit about that. So if there's one silver lining for the pandemic for us, it's been that it has increased the opportunity to have remote participation in the international human rights mechanisms at the UN. Because no one at the UN was able to conduct meetings and sessions in person, it made possible the ability of many organizations and people to participate from afar. So the Advocates was able to participate virtually in many meetings with the Human Rights Council and with treaty monitoring bodies. And we were able to also do our own events virtually. You just saw a little clip of one of them, the UPR Debrief. And Amy mentioned earlier side events, and those are like little seminars that we put on before the UPR, where we get a chance to tell the council delegates about these issues that we're reporting on in detail, and what recommendations we'd like them to make, and to answer their questions if they have some. So we were able to do some of those virtually as well. And in a few minutes, we'll show you a couple of short clips from that. But first, I'd like to introduce Kerry Brasser. And Kerry is one of our very frequent volunteers in both international advocacy and in immigration representation. And she's going to tell you a little bit about her experience volunteering with us in carrying out our international justice work. Kerry?
Hi, thank you, Lisa. I'm Kerry Brasser, and I am a pro bono attorney here in Minneapolis. In my former life, I was a litigator at Jones Day in Chicago, but have been focused exclusively since we moved here on doing what I can for the advocates. And the International Justice Program is near and dear to my heart. I have so enjoyed working with them. I started in 2019. My first time going to the United Nations was in March of 2019, where we actually physically got to travel across the ocean and visit another country, but we went. So, and like Aurélie said, it was amazing. You could just walk right into the Human Rights Council and approach the delegates you wanted to approach and ask to speak to them on the issues that we were concerned with and the countries we were concerned with and the recommendations that we wanted them to make. And it's amazing how, you know, they wanted to hear from us because we were experts on this issue, and they wanted to hear what we had to say on it. And we had spent the entire week meeting with them and setting up these meetings, and we were able to do also side events, in person, obviously side events there in Geneva on different issues that were important to us. I even got a chance to, I was able to give a statement before the Human Rights Council on one of our countries, Burundi, on the issues facing them and the recommendations we were looking for. And then the Human Rights Committee, often confused with the Human Rights Council, we did a little, it was sort of a preview of the upcoming UPR in the US, and I was able to give a statement to them on the immigration and asylum issue in the United States. And then last year, 2020, we were all set to go again, and literally the week, I think it was the Monday before we were supposed to leave on Thursday or Friday, was when everything shut down. So everything came to a halt. Nothing really happened that spring. They delayed the UPR to November. And as Lisa said, we were able to do all this stuff virtually. We did a side event before they were making the recommendations. My issue was the United States and police reform and police accountability, an especially salient and hot button issue in this country at that time, and still is. But we did a side event on that, and then we're able, once the countries had made their recommendations, afterwards we did another panel where we reacted to their recommendations and discussed, what they said and what they found most important and interesting in the US. So yeah, you can do it virtually. Who knew? You can do a lot virtually.
Thank you, Kerry. So I'm going to ask Carter then to help us again with some clips. And the first thing we're going to look at is the US side event. The first clip we have here features Situl, which is an organization here in Minnesota that we partner with that works on labor trafficking issues. And then the second one is a little piece of what Kerry did at our side event. Go ahead, Carter.
We know that when frontline workers are denied protection and safety, it impacts our entire society. It puts all of us more at risk for further increase in people contracting COVID-19. So now more than ever, worker safety is public health. If workers are safe, it improves public health. It's critical. It continues to be ignored by our federal government. And this is why we're here before you today, urging you to make our proposed recommendations to the United States to assure that workers are protected from COVID, but also are protected from all of the other egregious violations of their rights across the country. We want to make sure that workers have effective avenues to build power, that their voices can be heard to ensure that they can live and work with respect and dignity that all people deserve.
May, the killing of George Floyd, a Black Minnesota resident, by Minneapolis police officers sparked protests that have spread across the United States and the globe. Mr. Floyd's murder, and recently the failure to charge any police officers in the death of Breonna Taylor, a Kentucky resident who was killed by law enforcement officers while sleeping in her apartment, are both emblematic of the pervasive and racially disparate police violence that plagues US cities and towns. As Ms. Taylor's case most recently illustrates, there is little accountability, even for deadly violence exacted at the hands of the state. And this lack of any real disincentive against violence is now impacting protesters and journalists who are reporting on the protests. US laws at the federal level and in all 50 states fall far short of international standards regarding police use of force or prevention of extrajudicial state-involved killings.
So again, as I mentioned, our audience there is mostly Human Rights Council delegates, because we want to explain to them about the recommendations that we hope they'll make. But then afterwards, another thing we were able to do virtually this time around was these debriefings, such as the one Jeff spoke at, where it's really our opportunity to educate people about what goes on at the UPR and what the recommendations are and what we should make of them. So I'm going to play you just a little bit of one of those debriefs of the United States, which features Kerry again.
Reactions?
I found it, given the amount of time they have, the amount that Argentina packed in there was impressive, especially when they hit on all three prongs of getting criminal justice. You have investigation, prosecution, and punishment and accountability. They mentioned the structural discrimination, something our government denies is actually a problem, but they hit on that. So I was impressed by how much they were able to pack in there. Hopefully how much the US government will have to work with.
So as you can see, although we certainly missed the opportunity to be in Geneva in person, these virtual events really offered us some unique opportunities and reached quite a few people that we might not otherwise have been able to communicate, and had, surprisingly large audiences. We were really pleased with the number of people we engaged with those. So we will be moving on, I think, to Jennifer and Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Carter Mickelson, who's the one IJ staff person who you haven't met yet, because he's like the wizard behind making all the music and the video clips and stuff happen. So Carter, if you want to just give a quick wave. Carter is our Lutheran Volunteer Corps program assistant this year. But yes, I'd like to quickly introduce Karen Evans. Karen is the vice chair of the Advocates Board of Directors. Karen has traveled with us to Geneva one time and was on the list to go with us last March. So we're looking forward to traveling with her again. But Karen's very familiar with all of our work, and I'll hand it over to Karen to say a few words about how you can support this work.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I'm Karen. I volunteered with the Advocates for years and been on the board for 3 years. Thank you all for participating in this Zoom event. These are hopeful times. More and more citizens are becoming human rights advocates, not only here in Minnesota, but across the globe. Our world is becoming more connected, and that includes human rights defenders. The technologies that helped us cope throughout the pandemic have created new opportunities for collaborating and advocating. Thanks very much to our global partners who participated with us in this event today. As Jennifer said, I was a member of the advocates team at the United Nations in Geneva in March 2017. Jennifer kind of mentioned this already, but we advocate for countries where we have people on the ground, where we work with people. And so 2 of the countries up for review that year were Tunisia and Morocco. Tunisia's law, as Jennifer mentioned, that allowed perpetrators of sexual violence to avoid prosecution by marrying their victim. In Morocco's case, they stated that victims who report rape risk prosecution for illicit sexual relations. Seriously. In large part due to pressure from the Human Rights Council, Tunisia repealed its law. Unfortunately, Morocco's law stands as it was. Systemic racism has long plagued the United States. Despite protests from investigations, little seemed to change. Black, brown, and indigenous people experience police brutality, suffer from illegal searches, and are arrested unlawfully. However, decades of qualified immunity have eroded the power to sue public officials who commit civil rights violations. So I found it compelling to learn that George Floyd's family went to the United Nations Human Rights Council to bring international attention to what began at first as a very local issue, and obviously took on a life of its own, which was wonderful. Local and global advocacy must work together to create effective and lasting change. There are many actions that each of us can take. We can document human rights abuses, such as Darnella Frazier did in recording the murder of George Floyd. We can listen to those around us and bring their stories to local and international forums. We can join the advocates in Geneva, be part of the team. One can simply go as an observer or participate by speaking to council representatives to ask them to speak with us about laws that should be changed, or by making a short speech to the council. The Advocates provides excellent materials, conducts trainings before leaving Geneva and in Geneva, and the experience is incredible. It might sound like it would be intimidating or overwhelming, or I don't know how to do this, but it isn't at all. And one can do what they want, and you make great friends there. And it's remarkable to be there with 193 country representatives from the world. Little actions are the seeds for larger changes. There is one easy action you can take right now. I asked you to consider supporting the power of the moment with a financial gift if you can. We hope to raise $15,000 right now to support the Advocates' local and global advocacy, to abolish the death penalty here in the United States and in other countries, to protect religious minorities, and to support the rights of LGBTI community and more. Human rights are dear to my heart. Please join me in supporting this work financially. Donating is simple. Just text advocates to 243725. Try it right now. Alternatively, mail a check to the advocates. Every one of us has a responsibility and ability to advance human rights. Take an easy action and donate today. Your contribution will help our goal to make the world a place where every person lives with freedom, justice, equality, dignity, and peace. Wouldn't that be great? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen. It will be great. So we're coming to the end of our formal part of the program. Just a couple other things to say in closing. One thing is that the events of the past year have really reinforced for us that here in the United States at the Advocates and like our partners around the world, it's so clear to us that we need to use international advocacy. We need to use international standards as a roadmap for reform for the human rights work that needs to happen in our own community.